Welcome to the Ascends at Boston Avenue podcast. My name is Philip Boone. I am the Mid-High Director here at Boston Avenue Church. And today's episode is co-hosted by Caitlin Drake, who is our Communications Director. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, Philip.
And we are starting a 3-part series about talking with LGBTQ People of Faith. So this is part 1 of that series. And today I am joined by the Episcopal priest at St. Patrick's Episcopal Church in Broken Arrow, Spencer Brown. How are you doing, Spencer?
I'm well. How are y'all?
We're doing really well. I'm glad you were able to make it today. Well, we're going to start off with, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your faith journey?
Sure. So, like you said, in that lovely introduction that you gave me, that was all correct, that was not rehearsed at all before we started recording the podcast. So I am a priest in the Episcopal Church, and I serve the Diocese of Oklahoma at St. Patrick's Episcopal Church in Broken Arrow. I am a lifelong Tulsan. I born and raised, graduated from Booker T High School, actually came out of this church, out of Boston Avenue. So this is like kind of a homecoming in a way. I just spent 3 years in Austin, Texas at Seminary of the Southwest. So go Fighting Bishops for whatever that's worth.
I didn't even know that was the mascot, and that seems like they shouldn't go together. Like, are bishops supposed to fight?
I mean, they do. That's real. But it's an intramural, and that's a really generous term for it, flag football team that we play against the Presbyterian Seminary.
I was thinking about more in chess terms, and the bishop would fight there too as well.
That's really very academic.
That's very
lots of knowledge here on the Ascends podcast.
That's a lot more clever.
So tell us more about your faith journey and less about these bishops.
So I grew up in the Methodist Church. I was in choir from the time I could stand, and singing in church choir and civic choir, going to Sunday school, going to church camps. I felt a call, but I didn't know what to call that call and I felt it in high school, and so discerned with my my friend in faith, who is my sponsor for confirmation here at Boston Avenue, and slowly came to the realization that, I can't really be who I am and love who I love in this place, and that was heartbreaking. I was also coming to terms with who I am and trying to question, do I come out? Once I came out to myself, I had to question, does God still love me? If I decided to come out to other people, how does their perception change of me? And what's at risk for me? What's at risk is losing everything that I'm used to, losing my entire faith, losing my entire family, my friends, everything. So it was a bit of a crisis, but I was at TU at the time. Actually started at TCC and then went to TU and studied vocal performance and started singing everywhere. And I was singing in church choirs as a soloist. I was singing I was working as a director some different places, doing youth choirs. And I fell into the Episcopal Church kind of by accident. I'd been singing in Episcopal churches. I knew about it, but I actually started to attend one and was like, wow, there's something about this that feels right. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to keep going back and doing this crazy thing. And I joined. And once I started to join, I felt that call again. And I started to discern with the priest at the church. And we went through, I don't know how many years of discernment just together, kind of reclaiming my faith, my understanding of God, my relationship with other people, trust, all of that nitty-gritty stuff. And finally came out of the closet a second time and said, I want to go into ordained ministry, which was the second scariest statement in my life. And it feels like after that statement came out of my mouth, it was ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba, and now I'm here. So, but it was a lot more complicated than that. But started my discernment and went through the diocese and that whole process, seminary, ordination, and now I am a priest.
Coming out as LGBTQ, was it hard for you to leave the United Methodist Church? Because you had grown up at Boston Avenue, so that's as far as much as you knew is the United Methodist Church. But whenever you came out and said, I'm LGBTQ, I can't stay here, was that a difficult transition, or was it I need to be where I need to be who I need to be?
So it was a difficult transition, and it wasn't. On one hand, it was because this is all I knew. My dad, who died in about 12 years ago, is interred. His ashes are interred here, and so kind of being ripped from that familial and love context. And it wasn't difficult at the same time because I said, I have to maintain my own integrity. Mm-hmm. And this is all looking back on it now. It's, much easier to see in hindsight than it was in the moment. But it was easy because I could say, oh, look, I'm going to go work at this church and make money and do what my degree says I can do. And so it was a yes and no. It was a difficult thing and a not difficult thing.
Now that you're in ministry, are you finding challenges within either the church community that you're in or just kind of the Christian church community at large around being fully included or being fully welcomed?
That's a big question. Yes. There isn't a perfect institution. That the institution continues to cause harm no matter how much they say that they're welcoming and inclusive. And I want to make known that the word welcoming, to say we're welcoming, is so vastly different than saying we're inclusive and affirming. Yes. That those things are so different, and that is something that before we can talk about anything else, that we have to make it through that conversation first.
And how would you articulate that difference? Because I know you and I have personally had these conversations, but for folks who maybe think of them as kind of the same idea, this welcoming and inclusive being the same, how would you differentiate the two?
So to be welcoming is to say our doors are open. You're welcome to come here. I just used the word in its definition. Our doors are open. You are invited to come in, but we like things how they are. And so as much as you can, try to, keep it as it is.
Try to fit in.
Try to fit in, try to integrate, and maybe leave some of yourself at the door.
Yeah, my thought a lot of that is to see, does an LGBTQ couple feel comfortable holding hands? I mean,
yes.
If the answer is no, then welcoming, not inclusive and affirming. Like there's litmus tests like that you can find out if you are inclusive.
And if you're proud of your identity, do you receive backlash for wearing an emblem of your identity, whatever that means to you, whether it's pins that declare your preferred pronouns, whether it's an ally pin, whether it's a rainbow pin, whether it's a trans flag pin. Like if you get pushback from that, then you're welcoming, but you're not affirming. Because to be inclusive is to be affirming of someone and to allow them to be who they are fully, and to be truly intercultural, where you're not erasing anyone's identity, you're celebrating and helping them to flourish fully in who they are.
And I feel that that's a good thing for allies to be able to do, is say, like, I'm attempting to get more into that. So on my Facebook, on the top, I put he, him, his. And so if allies can share their pronouns as they go, LGBTQ people will feel comfortable as well. So that's a good thing for allies to be able to do as well.
Yes, that's a way of, because I do a lot of work with one of my dearest friends, Josh, who he and I are working on our own podcast project called Standing With. So it's a little plug. It's not out there yet, but we're working on it.
Let us know when it drops, and we'll be sure to.
Don't worry,
Philip
you'll know.
will add it to the rotation of 50 plus podcasts that he loves.
So part of the work that we've done is to say you cannot self-describe as an ally. You can self-describe as someone who will stand with a marginalized person or community, But that person in that community has to say, thank you for being an ally. They're the ones that have the power to declare you as an ally. But to do things like putting your pronouns on, whether it's Facebook, at the end of your email or whatever, that is a way of inviting people in and saying, even if it's not the whole institution, I am a person that feels strongly enough about this that I'm willing to pull you up from wherever you are and let you speak over me, because I'm trying to create a platform.
I've seen a lot of breaking down of the idea of ally as more of a verb than as a noun, or as an adjective, that it's about the action that you're taking, rather than an identity that you just get to hold.
Yes, and I think that's a really important distinction, particularly where we are right now.
So kind of a flip question around this. From my, personal relationships and experiences, I know a lot of folks in the LGBTQ community who have been harmed by churches. And so in some ways there is a lot of distrust and discomfort with folks who are people of faith. So, do you find challenges within the LGBTQ community, especially as a faith leader?
I definitely do, and including challenges within my own person, that I still struggle sometimes with particularly the institution of church and the history of church, of harm that has been done, and then witnessing harm that continues to go on through language, through action. And even though I'm not really still a part of the United Methodist Church, but the United Methodist Church and the Episcopal Church, we're all part of the greater body, that the body is still being hurt by words, by actions, regardless of the intent of that never negates the impact it has on an entire people group.
And people don't have the ability to say whether their words are harmful.
Absolutely.
If you harmed somebody, if someone takes it as harmful, then yes, they were.
Then you have done harm.
You can't say, my words weren't harmful, I didn't mean that, because you still caused harm.
Right, yeah.
What do you wish people knew about LGBTQ people of faith?
We're here. We exist. We're not oxymorons. That there is still... my experience of people of faith, LGBT people or queer people who still have faith, often distance themselves from faith communities because of the harm done, because of this particularly spiritual abuse and the trauma that they carry with them. And I carry some of that trauma with me, and to recognize that they may never come back to the church. That because you've said you're inclusive and affirming, I would say don't expect this huge influx of members from the queer community. But recognize that the healing that has to take place requires a lot of hard and difficult work on the part of people within the church. Saying that this language is unacceptable, to say, what are we willing to risk by being inclusive and affirming, and actually risking that. So
kind of you probably don't have this is definitely the answer on this, but just in case you do, there is that the church has to first step back from doing the harm that it's doing. But what other actions can folks take to step forward and help with healing? Besides backing away from harmful policies and language, is there a role for church as an institution, or for people of faith, maybe without the institution, to facilitate healing?
One of the things that I can foresee would be listening intently and deeply to people who have been harmed by the church. And this doesn't just go for the queer community. This is for women. This is for people of color. This is for homeless people who have been ministered to rather than ministered with. That we need to listen to their needs and how they've been harmed and be able to receive that, rather than saying, great, we listened, good for us, pat on the back. No, that we hear in what they're saying the work that needs to be done. And that's the only way that we'll really know how to move forward.
When you talk about inclusive and affirming churches. Whenever you mention that you can't really self-identify as an ally, someone who is LGBTQ needs to kind of identify you as one. Would you say the same about, you can't really say you're inclusive and affirming, someone else, an LGBTQ person, has to identify you as one? It's hard
like
to self
as a church,
as
like
a church,
like
as
Boston
a church,
Avenue
yes,
can't
as a
say
church,
we're
thank
super
you.
progressive.
But I meant as a church, someone else has to identify you as inclusive and affirming.
Right. I would say that's true, and it's complicated because we have these, monikers or organizations that you can go through training and things like that, and then put the thing up on your door and say, "Yay, we're whatever this is." That is part of it, but that's not the whole story.
Where do you find hope for the future of the church? Do you find hope for the future of the church? Maybe that should be the first question.
I mean, I'm in it, so I've got to have a
a
little bit of hope somewhere. I find hope, and I don't know how cliche this will sound. I find hope in the young people who are just out there and just going, "No, this is wrong. I don't like this." Or, the people that have left the church and given reason why. Like those are the people that we need to listen to and figure out what's happening and what are we doing that is not okay. But that still gives me hope that we all have some kind of a spiritual connection. What is that, and how do we heal from the division?
So, we kind of touched on this in our ally conversation, but then also, in terms of listening and what people of faith and what the church can do to move towards healing. But what is, for you, the most important thing that Christians, church members can do to support their LGBTQ siblings, neighbors, community at large?
That's a really big question too. You've asked two really big questions today. I don't know if I have a pinpoint answer to that, because there are so many different things that people can do. One thing is to never, I would say, to do what we can to never speak over someone is someone else who's marginalized. We need to speak up for them, but never speak over. So anytime that you find yourself, or I find myself, trying to speak for a community, that's not right, because I don't identify as that. But reach out and find that voice that you can bring up. And that's how we create more visibility. If you are an ally, there are risks as coming out as someone who's willing to stand with a marginalized community. Take those risks, because there are more people behind you than you think there are. That whatever that means to you, whether it's you're going to wear a little rainbow pin, just one day you just put it on, or you're going to wear a pin with your preferred pronouns, whatever that is. If it's something outside the queer community, if it's I stand with women, if it's whatever it is for you, that is a way of saying, I'm taking a risk here and being visible, but I'm also willing to listen and to learn at how I can better do this.
Were there any people in your own faith journey that were really good at supporting you, or that took risks kind of on your behalf that you want to shout out to, or
I do, yes. So,
point to as good examples?
Yes, I have many people that I continue to be really close with today that have been really really strong and really in my corner. And one person in particular who would probably be fairly embarrassed of me kind of shouting out to her, but she was the one that I discerned with. And when we didn't know exactly how the diocese would take my paperwork or what the bishop's reaction was going to be, she went to bat. And before the committee and before the bishop asked, what is it like? What would it be like to have someone who is openly gay and partnered at the time? We're married now. We didn't break up.
Important clarification.
Clarification. Marriage was not available to us at the time. But what would it look like to have someone like this go through this process, and would we be able to bring them back to this diocese and have them ordained? Those are huge questions that really kind of clouded over everything. And she came back the next day and said, submit your application. and we'll see what happens. I mean, it wasn't a no, and it wasn't like the strongest yes, but it was, canon law says that there isn't discrimination, and so we did it, and now I'm here.
What does inclusion look like in your congregation or denomination? And what does a full vision of inclusion look like to you?
Ooh, I don't know. I mean, there's so many things. My brain's kind of going off right now. One of the things I think of is what we're seeing in the Episcopal Church with the election of a lot of women to the episcopate, that the Holy Spirit is moving through this, and we're trying to bring forth the most qualified people, and it still makes my heart glad that we're raising up people who have been marginalized, who represent more of a majority in the population than men. Mm-hmm. That inclusion could look like, having these kinds of conversations with people who wouldn't normally show up. That we all know that if we have a training on human sexuality or on feminist theology or whatever you want to have a training on, that the people that are going to show up are always the same people. Inclusion would look like having the people that never show up to show up. I don't know how that would happen, but that would be inclusion for me.
Reaching the people in the middle, or further to the right, or wherever
they are,
because you always get the people that are fully on board,
right.
But you want those are important to have,
right.
But you want to reach more.
We're trying to break what it would look like to break down the silos of people. It was kind of, and that's a question that I don't know will be answered in our lifetime or anything.
How to answer, quite frankly.
I don't either. I mean, it's a tricky, complicated question.
I think per your point about having more women in the Episcopal Church, just in those kind of leadership roles, I think giving folks an opportunity to lead and to use whatever their gifts that they have for the benefit of the whole. I think so often folks are denied the opportunity to even share their gifts because we shut down putting folks in leadership positions because we always go to the same people or the same committees or,
Right. And, it's not to say that there aren't qualified men for the episcopate. And, I'm not behind those closed doors. But maybe inclusion looks like visibility. That's part of what inclusion could look like. Is just having people out there that are visible that look like those who stand in the margins.
Kind of like with the issue of LGBTQ equality in the United Methodist Church, having a bunch of straight white men leading the charge isn't necessarily the way you want to go. You need LGBTQ people and with them at the table kind of helping lead the charge.
Right. And we see it in our public life. We see it in the secular world where the people making the decisions for people who have been marginalized are not those people. Mm-hmm. That those voices are never, at least I don't want to say never, but are often not at the table.
Or kind of tokenized,
or
right?
Tokenized.
That you bring in.
That we have the chair, we have one person, and they represent the entire community, and that's never good. I may know something about that, but that's for another podcast.
Excellent. Caitlin, do you have any more questions?
I think really turning it over to Spencer, do you have any last messages that you would want to share?
I would like to say that there is a lot of hope, that we are so divided, whether it's the Methodist Church, whether it's just the church in general, that if we think about it, we're in this together, that the body of Christ is standing there and the body of Christ is wounded. We have to address what is wounded, and what is wounded right now are queer people, are trans people, people of color, women, refugees, immigrants. We have to address that part of the body that's wounded and not just say the body as a whole is fine.
Thanks, Spencer.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.
This has been the Ascends at Boston Avenue podcast. We're located at 1301 South Boston. And if you can, please go to our Facebook page. We have Facebook, Instagram, we're on Twitter. So go to Boston Avenue UMC for any of those social media sites. And we will talk to you next time. Thank you.